Were you in trouble with the law?
Quite a bit, yes.
Were you ever in prison, though?
Nassau County Jail was as far as it went for me.
Right.
But everything that he said, it was the truth. You know, man, you didn't feel it like, oh, this dude is lying. Everything he said, it was truth. And one of the most genuine people you want to meet, man.
He knew how to fight, for sure.
And he never.
He knew martial arts, man.
He was big into it.
Charlie Murphy had a way of making you laugh till your sides ached. Yet hidden beneath that grin was a past most people never spoke about.
Did you like to fight?
I learned to like it. You know, when it's something that's gonna happen, it's inevitable. You know, it's part of the environment. It's either one way or the other to take it. Either you're gonna ball up into a fetal position or shrimp.
He wasn't only Eddie Murphy's brother or a sharp storyteller. He was a product of New York's harshest blocks, a King Python's gang soldier shaped by struggle, loss, and brutality.
I got rid of my gun because I was gonna solve a problem that was very simple, okay, with a gun, because I got emotional, I got angry, and the first, oh, you're gonna talk to me like that? I'm gonna solve it like that.
After their father's death, Charlie toughened up guarding Eddie through high school, carrying wounds from a world Hollywood rarely realized he had survivor elected from.
I think what I really think affected me the most was, you know, when I was 10 years old, my father was murdered.
Right.
Okay? And I didn't realize it, but I guess it had an effect on me. I became, you know, angry or whatever, yeah, you know.
And when the mask slipped, the world found out Charlie Murphy was dangerous and always had been. Let's talk about it, the hidden side of a legend. Most people first came to know Charlie Murphy through laughter. They saw him in Chappelle's show telling stories that became instant classics. For a lot of fans, he was Eddie Murphy's older brother, the guy with that unforgettable voice and those sharp punchlines. Some saw him as a man who gave us the famous Rick James and Prince skits, moments that stamped him into comedy history. And of course, for those who really paid attention, Charlie was more than just a funny brother. He was a writer, an actor, and an artist who built his own lane in Hollywood.
When he passed away, nobody said Eddie Murphy's brother died.
Right.
Everybody was like, Charlie Murphy passed away. So he had his true identity, and that was Charlie Murphy.
But here's the truth. For every laugh Charlie Murphy gave the world, there was another side few ever really witnessed. A side molded by violence, loss, and the unforgiving streets of Brooklyn and Long Island in the 1970s. Long before comedy clubs knew his name, Charlie's reputation was carved in back alleys, tough blocks, holding cells, and among men who fought for respect. Charlie himself once admitted his humor was born out of anger. Not the kind you shake off, but the kind rooted in a childhood, scarred with brutal unfairness. Born Charles Quentin Murphy in 1959 in Brooklyn's Bushwick, he came from a family that struggled hard. His parents split when he was just 5, and by 10 he lost his father, Charles Edward Murphy, a transit cop with dreams of being a comedian, to murder. Charlie later said he never processed it right. He didn't cry enough, he just locked the pain away and kept moving. Because really, what else could a 10-year-old boy do? That kind of wound at that kind of age doesn't fade. It turns you to stone.
I think what I really think affected me the most was, you know, when I was 10 years old, my father was murdered.
Right.
Okay? And I didn't realize it, but I guess it had an effect on me. I became, you know, angry or whatever.
And it didn't stop there. Not long after, his mother Lillian was struck with tuberculosis and forced into the hospital. Charlie and Eddie were placed in foster care, where Charlie endured abuse at the hands of their foster mother. A boy already mourning his father's death, now torn from his mother, suddenly had to protect himself and his little brother under a stranger's roof. These weren't the makings of an easy childhood. They were the kind that hardened a fighter, a guardian. That's exactly what Charlie became, the protector. When Eddie was still just a kid, Charlie made sure no one laid a hand on him. At school, if trouble came Eddie's way, it had to go through Charlie first.
Very protective of both of my younger brothers.
Right. So if I said something bad, you would jump on my...
That weight of responsibility, mixed with the pain he carried inside, shaped the man Charlie was turning into. After his father's death, when the family moved to Roosevelt, Long Island, he found himself in yet another hard place. On the surface, the neighborhood looked picture perfect. Picket fences, green lawns, the kind of spot people imagined was safe. But Charlie would later reveal it was all just a mask. Roosevelt in the 1970s was rough, violent, and unpredictable, especially for kids who didn't grow up there. Behind the polished houses was a street reality most people didn't want to believe. For Charlie, already burdened by his father's death and the scars of foster care, it was just another battlefield. Outsiders from Brooklyn or the Bronx who got dropped into Roosevelt weren't welcomed. They were tested. And if you weren't willing to fight, you were guaranteed to get hurt.
Moved to Roosevelt, and then, I was an outcast in Roosevelt because I was from Brooklyn.
Charlie was never the type to back down. He carved out his place by connecting with other outsiders, kids like him who'd been pushed into Long Island. Together, they built a crew and gave themselves a name, the King Python Gang.
And it together because that year, for some reason, there was a lot of people, like a mass migration of people from the city moving out to the island.
Right.
So we all became a crew.
That name was about survival. Rolling with the King Pythons meant you never walked alone. You had backup. You had protection. Charlie proved himself fast. He wasn't just another face in the crew. He rose to little boss. That title carried weight. It meant leadership. It meant people trusted his word enough to follow it. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest, but he moved with confidence. And in a place like Roosevelt, confidence and respect were the only currencies that mattered.
And you could tell when he was growing up, he was the guy that always had the center of attention.
Yeah.
You could just tell that.
Yeah, you could tell. He knows how to hold a story.
Life in the King Pythons meant proving yourself every single day. That meant after-school fights, holding your ground on the block, and sometimes stepping into situations that could turn fatal. Roosevelt was filled with crews, and those crews constantly clashed. If someone disrespected you or tested your gang, you had no choice but to respond. Charlie learned early on that backing down wasn't an option. One story he shared says it all. Back in 9th grade, a classmate pressed a pistol to his forehead and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed, and that's the only reason Charlie survived. Moments like that weren't rare. They were part of his world. Growing up like that forces you to think differently. It sharpens you, makes you cautious, but it also makes you fearless. Once you've stared death in the face, it changes the way you move. That edge stayed with him. Years later, Eddie Murphy admitted in interviews that classmates left him alone because everyone knew who his brother was. Eddie flat out said, Charlie was in gangs. Charlie was a really tough guy. And it wasn't just street fights. Charlie trained in martial arts and eventually earned a black belt in karate.
He knew how to fight, for sure.
And he
knew martial arts, man.
He was big into it.
Friends and fellow comedians like Donald Rawlings vouched for it. Charlie really knew how to fight. He wasn't just swinging wild. He was skilled, sharp enough to school trained UFC fighters on technique. That mix of raw toughness and disciplined training made him even more formidable. But toughness never canceled out consequences. Running with the King Pythons dragged Charlie into choices that left lasting marks. One of those choices was an armed robbery. He and some of his crew stuck up a taxi driver at gunpoint. Charlie got caught and was hit with 3 years of probation. For most, that would have been enough to spark a wake-up call. For Charlie, though, the streets still had their grip. While on probation, he picked up new charges: larceny, loitering, and other petty crimes. But small charges stack up when you're already on thin ice. The judge finally decided he was out of chances, and Charlie was sent to Nassau County Jail for 10 months. He later admitted he was a knucklehead back then, reckless and impulsive, never stopping to think about the consequences. Jail was the price he had to pay. Still, even in the chaos, Charlie wasn't blind to searching for something deeper. For a while, he connected with the 5 Percenters, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths, taking the name Omar Allah. They gave him structure, identity, and belonging outside the gang. But Charlie's mind was sharp and questioning. He didn't just accept teachings blindly. He studied, asked questions, and eventually realized it wasn't his path. Walking away showed another side of him. He wasn't afraid to step back if something didn't feel true. Through all of it, loyalty stayed at his core. Loyalty to Eddie, to his friends, to his crew. Jail is meant to scare you straight, but when Charlie looked back, he admitted the scariest part was that it didn't scare him at all. He never folded, never hid. If anything, lockup became the first place he tested another side of himself, the comedian. He started cracking jokes, making inmates laugh, even reciting poems about the people around him. Donald Rawlings would later point out Charlie had never touched a stage before then, but in county lockup, with nothing but time and tension, he found his voice. Still, don't mistake it, he wasn't laughing his way through because life was easy. That period gave him the edge people would later feel when he walked into a room. This was a man who had survived the streets and jail without breaking. And when you've lived through that, you carry it with you everywhere, moving through a world built on violence and respect. The day he got out, Charlie wasted no time. No hanging back, no slipping into old patterns. He walked straight into the Navy recruiter's office. It was 1978, and he was only 18. Looking back, Charlie would say, "That's when I became a man." In the military, you stay on the right path because every other option is stripped away. I needed that. They set me straight. Those words showed just how much Charlie knew he craved structure. For a kid raised around gangs, scarred by the loss of his father, and carrying the burden of protecting his little brother, the streets would always call, but the military gave him what the streets never could: discipline. And don't get it confused, discipline didn't soften him. If anything, it sharpened him. The Navy gave him order and routine, but it never took away the fire already burning inside. It simply redirected it. Put someone like Charlie Murphy in a world where you wake up on time, follow orders, and hold steady under pressure, and he thrived. After 6 years, Charlie walked out of the Navy tougher than when he went in, which says a lot, because he had already been hard. By the time he came back home, Eddie Murphy wasn't just Eddie anymore. He was Eddie Murphy the superstar. Saturday Night Live, blockbuster films, stand-up tours, Eddie's name was everywhere. And with that level of fame came attention, both good and bad. That's when Charlie stepped in, moving into Eddie's security detail. Only now, instead of shutting down fights in the schoolyard, he was holding the line in Hollywood, protecting one of the biggest stars on the planet.
In fact, he used to be Eddie's bodyguard when Eddie was like right at the height of his stuff. But Charlie was like martial art.
Charlie later admitted it himself. I was there for the person I loved, and the people around him didn't like it. And it made sense. Charlie wasn't built for games. If he felt something was off, he called it out. If he thought someone was a threat, he treated them like one. The truth is, most of the people in Eddie's circle back then weren't used to that kind of energy. They weren't used to a man who had actually fought, who had done time, who had stared down real danger looking at them with those eyes. And while Charlie eventually stepped away from working security because he knew he wasn't meant to live in the background, he never let go of the toughness that put him there. Even in Hollywood, that street mentality never left. Chris Rock once recalled Charlie showing up to an audition with a real gun, shocking people who weren't ready for that kind of seriousness. Neil Brennan, co-creator of Chappelle's show, shared another story of Charlie grabbing a Tech 9 to handle a problem, ready to settle things the way the streets had taught him to.
Well, Neil Brennan tells this story, the co-creator of the Chappelle show. He tells this story about you, that there was an actual situation where you grabbed a Tech 9 off a dresser and you were going to deal with a situation of some...
Eddie had to step in and tell him, "This isn't a movie. This is real." Charlie later admitted that he lost control, got emotional, and nearly made the worst mistake of his life. Thankfully, he never pulled the trigger, but the fact that he even reached for the weapon showed exactly where he came from, how quick his instincts were when he felt disrespected, and how close he could come to crossing that line. In time, Charlie put the gun down for good, later saying he was grateful he did. By then, he didn't need a weapon to command respect. His size, his presence, his voice, and his past already spoke louder than any firearm ever could. Everyone around him, comedians, actors, rappers, knew Charlie Murphy wasn't just a funny storyteller. He was a man who had lived the kind of life they only rapped about, wrote into scripts, or imagined in movies. Over time, Charlie admitted he had to change. He learned firsthand how anger could have pushed him into a fatal mistake, and letting go of the gun was his way of choosing growth over destruction. That shift set the stage for the moment that changed everything. In 2003, Dave Chappelle and Neil Brennan pulled him in and said, "Get him in here." That's when Charlie finally stepped into his own fame. What separated him wasn't just being funny. Plenty of people were funny. Charlie's edge was that his stories weren't fiction, they were lived. He didn't put on a tough guy act for the cameras, he really had been that guy. And when he sat down for Charlie Murphy's true Hollywood stories, it was pure lightning in a bottle. Take the Rick James sketch. Overnight, it became one of the most quoted comedy sketches in television history. But Rick James wasn't just a joke, it was a cultural explosion. And if you listened closely, Charlie wasn't just clowning, he was telling the truth. Rick had crossed the line over and over. And Charlie really had been in those rooms, throwing real punches at a superstar who wouldn't quit. He even admitted there were countless more stories too wild for TV. The Prince sketch carried that same magic. A random late-night basketball game with Prince and his crew sounded like pure exaggeration, until Eddie Murphy himself confirmed every detail. Prince did beat them on the court and served pancakes afterward. Even Prince co-signed it, using Chappelle's parody of him on a single cover. That's when you knew these weren't just hilarious stories, they had become part of American pop culture. But what made them legendary wasn't just the punchlines, it was Charlie's delivery. His voice, his presence, the weight of danger beneath every laugh. That's what made people lean in. Even as Hollywood doors swung open after Chappelle's show, nobody ever forgot that Charlie wasn't some background character riding his brother's fame. He was his own man, a dangerous one at that, and people respected him differently. After the show ended in 2006, Charlie stood at a crossroads. Donald Rawlings, one of his closest friends, pushed him hard into stand-up. At first, Charlie didn't even want to do it. But Rawlings knew what he had. He told him straight, "You so tough in every other way, but not with a microphone in your hand."
I used to bully him, but I was like, yeah, you so tough, but not with a microphone in your hand. And I bullied him so much that he finally went on stage.
That's how Charlie's second act began, and it wasn't glamorous. He bombed hard, stumbled on stage, and even admitted the early setbacks nearly derailed his whole career. But Charlie was never built to run from a fight. When Martin Lawrence pulled him aside and told him to treat stand-up like another battlefield, Charlie took it to heart. He started grinding, writing, rehearsing, hitting the road, and step by step, he carved out his own lane. Before long, he was touring on the I'm Rich tour alongside then-rising comics like Bill Burr. Soon after, he was sharing stages with giants like George Lopez, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, and Eddie Griffin on the massive Comedy Get Down tour. He had gone from standing in Eddie's shadow to standing shoulder to shoulder with the best in the business. And yet, through all of it, that edge never left him. He stayed a martial artist, someone you didn't want to test. Comedians told stories of life on tour, watching Charlie break down combat moves to UFC fighters with an authority that only came from living it. Nobody doubted a word because they knew it wasn't talk. It was truth. Even as the spotlight burned bright, even as America laughed at sketches that had become part of pop culture, the weight of his past was always there. Charlie Murphy was never just Eddie's brother, never just another comic. He was a man forged in violence, loss, gangs, and survival, who somehow turned that history into laughter. And if you really looked, even at the height of his comedy fame, the fire in his eyes reminded you, once you've lived that life, it never truly leaves.